Washoe County Library System welcomes you to our final presentation in our Artown Tuesdays series presented by the Nevada Historical Society. This afternoon's topic is about Nevada military women with retired Colonel Ann Davis. My name is Samantha and I'm so happy to be here with you today. And now I would like to introduce Linda Burke with the Nevada Historical Society.
Thank you, Samantha. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for Artown at the Washoe County Library. I'm Linda Burke, Vice President of the Docent Council, a volunteer group at the Nevada Historical Society, Nevada's oldest cultural institution, located on the University of Nevada, Reno campus, and now open to the public on Wednesdays and on Thursday and Friday by appointment. Today, I wish to introduce you to a former docent at the Nevada Historical Society and a graduate from West Point, Ann Davis. Ann served on active duty in the Army for 29 years in various locations and leadership positions and retired as colonel. She commanded the first woman to do so, as at the Hawthorne Army Depot here in Nevada from 2000 to 2002. Ann has an MBA from Harvard Business School and a PhD from City University of New York. Since retirement, Ann has been involved in veterans issues in Nevada and nationally. At the Nevada Historical Society, Ann gave tours in the gallery for Artown from 2015 through 2018 on the topics of the federal presence and gaming. It is my pleasure to present Ann Davis on Nevada military women. Enjoy.
Welcome to this presentation on Nevada's military women. As an Army veteran, I find this to be an important and interesting topic, and I hope you do too. First, I think it's important for us to define who or what I mean when we talk about Nevada's military women. There's no one way to define this. Is it women from Nevada, women who served in Nevada? Today, I'm going to be inclusive and define this term very broadly to include military women who have done historic things within the state of Nevada, those born in Nevada who have done things outside of the state, and women who served or supported the military only to make their way back to Nevada later in life. Why not claim credit for all of those women? The second thing I think is important is to frame this presentation within the greater context of women's roles in the United States military to best understand how those roles have changed over time. So when did women first enter military service? While not officially part of the military, women have served for as long as our country has been around. In 1782, the Revolutionary War raged on. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man named Robert Shirtliff, joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment, and was given the dangerous task of scouting neutral territory to assess the British buildup of men and material in Manhattan, which General George Washington contemplated attacking. In June of 1782, Sampson and 2 sergeants led about 30 infantrymen on an expedition that ended with a confrontation with the Tories, and she led a raid on a Tory home that resulted in the capture of 15 men. At the siege of Yorktown, she dug trenches, helped storm a British redoubt, and endured cannon fire. For over 2 years, Sampson's true sex escaped detection, despite several close calls. During one skirmish, she received a gash on her forehead from a sword and was shot in her left thigh, but she extracted the pistol ball herself. She was ultimately discovered in Philadelphia when she became ill during an epidemic, was taken to a hospital, and lost consciousness. She received a military pension from the state of Massachusetts, one of very few women to receive a military pension at that time. During the War of 1812, women served mainly as camp followers, providing services such as laundress, seamstress, cooks, and nurses. Most women stayed at home to take care of farm and family, while their husbands, brothers, and sons. Some wives became soldiers. However, there was a lottery at times to decide how many wives were able to go with their husbands during these battle campaigns. The number was even as low as 6 wives per 100 soldiers. So I'm not sure if I would have liked to have been a winner of that lottery. Nevada became the 36th state by entering the Union as a free state on October 31st of 1864, after telegraphing the Constitution of Nevada to the Congress days before the November of 1864 presidential election. It's the largest and costliest transmission ever by telegraph at that time. Statehood was rushed to help ensure 3 electoral votes for Abraham Lincoln's reelection and to add to the Republican congressional majorities. Nevada's main contribution to the Civil War cause came from its burgeoning mining industry, and at least $400 million in silver ore from the Comstock lode was used to finance the federal war effort. Nevada had scarcely 7,000 Americans, according to the 1860 US Census, but they raised 1,200 soldiers for the Union cause. During the Civil War, Nevada suffered a total of 33 killed. 29 died as a result of disease. 2 were mortally wounded while fighting Indians at the Battle of Table Mountain in Humboldt, Nevada. 1 died from an accident, and 1 died from causes other than battle. During the Civil War, some women were on the battlefields, but many women stayed at home. Usually when men went off to fight, women were left with the responsibilities for farms, ranches, homes, and businesses. The first and only woman to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor was Dr. Mary Walker, who was a contract surgeon during the war. Dr. Walker led an unconventional life for a woman of the mid-19th century. She became a doctor when few women were even credentialed in nursing. Divorced in an era when women's positions were primarily defined by wifehood and motherhood, she advocated for dress reform for women and even wore men's clothing to lecture on women's rights. Walker was eventually appointed Assistant Surgeon in the Army of the Cumberland, and after the war, President Andrew Johnson awarded her the Congressional Medal of Honor based on the recommendations of Major Generals Sherman and Thomas. And as a result of her service to the Union during the Civil War, Mary Walker was paid $766.16 and provided a monthly pension that was lower than most of the war widows. Clara Barton is known as the Florence Nightingale of the United States. She worked with field surgeons during several major battles of the Civil War. And as the war ended, she helped locate thousands of missing soldiers, including identifying the dead at Andersonville Prison in Georgia. Barton lobbied for U.S. recognition of the International Committee of the Red Cross and became president of the American branch when it was founded in 1881. While there was no local Red Cross branch in Nevada during the Civil War, there was the Sanitary Commission, which sought to find ways to help the wounded, sick, and disabled soldiers in the war. The contributions by Western states, including Nevada, was through fundraising to keep the Sanitary Commission afloat. The picture on the lower left of the slide is a fancy dress ball held by the women of Carson City to raise money for the U.S. Sanitary Commission. The fancy dress ball featured a fundraising gimmick, a sack of flour that was continually auctioned off for high prices and then donated back to be sent to another ladies' aid society. On April 30th of 1917, little more than 3 weeks after the United States entered World War I, Nevada had already supplied its entire quota of men for the draft. Draft totals from 1917 to February of 1918 numbered 1,447, which exceeded the quota of 162 men by 900%. Since women were not allowed to enlist in the service, there were no women included in this number. One significant change to women's service during World War I is that American civilian women donned uniforms. The uniform allowed women to look the part and to claim credibility for their service, as well as to be taken seriously by others. Many women saw their wartime service as a way to claim full citizenship. But women assisted in the war effort in a variety of ways. The girls at Sparks High School formed the state's first patriotic league in September of 1917. The young women collected magazines for military hospitals overseas and assisted the Red Cross. Later that year, the Patriotic League was recognized for its efforts, which included knitting garments, assembling Christmas packages, and raising funds for the Red Cross. Throughout the state, Nevada's women volunteered their time and energy for the war effort. Joining women across the country, they formed their own branches of such organizations as the State and National Councils of Defense, the Liberty Loan Committee, Department of Educational Propaganda and Patriotic Education, and state chapters of the Federation of Women's Clubs. World War I changed traditional gender roles by allowing women to take part in activities other than women's groups. Under the auspices of self-defense or war vigilance, Some formed their own gun clubs or home guard units, while others joined men's organizations, such as the American Protective League. One of those women was Frances Freithof. For the entire duration of World War I, she served upon the Council of Defense with the Red Cross and as secretary of the Lyon County 4-Minute Men. The 4-Minute Men were a group of volunteers authorized by United States President Woodrow Wilson to give 4-minute speeches on topics given to them by the Committee on Public Information. In 1917 and 18, over 750,000 speeches were given in over 5,200 communities by over 70,000 accomplished orators, including men, women, and children, reaching about 400 million listeners. The topics dealt with the American war effort and were presented during the 4 minutes between reels, changing in movie theaters across the country. Also, the speeches were made to be 4 minutes so that they could be given at town meetings, at restaurants, and other places that had an audience. Several years after her contributions to the war effort, Mrs. Freithof became the first woman to serve as the Nevada State Senator in 1935. And in France, 223 American women, popularly known as the Hello Girls, served as long-distance switchboard operators for the U.S. Army Signal Corps. The Hello Girls maintained communications in 75 French localities, sometimes working under combat conditions. They included 2 Nevada women, Emmeline Jackson of Aurora and Margaret Hope Curvin of Reno. When some of the Hello Girls dared to claim veterans' benefits, they were met with blank bewilderment, followed by irate refusal. Some of the women persisted, however, for almost 60 years. And in 1977, when the youngest of them was nearing 80 years of age, they won recognition as veterans. World War I was the first time in American history in which women were officially attached to arms of the American military. The first American women to enlist into the regular armed forces were 13,000 women admitted into active duty in the Navy. They served in stateside jobs and received the same benefits and responsibilities as men, including identical pay, which was $28.75 per month. These women were quickly demobilized when hostilities ceased, and aside from the Nurse Corps, the Uniform Army and Navy once again became exclusively male. Now, this wouldn't be a military briefing if we didn't have some acronyms. It was during World War II that women officially became a part of the military. Because of the large number of personnel needed to fight and support World War II, more women became involved, and about 70% of the women who served in the military during World War II held traditionally female jobs. They worked as typists, clerks, and mail sorters. By filling office jobs that would otherwise be held by men, women freed more men to fight, and women were not permitted to participate in armed conflict. The Army, as well as all of the services, do not want to accept women directly. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, the Army established the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and that was later converted to the Women's Army Corps, more popularly known as the WWII, in 1943, and they were recognized as an official part of the regular Army. The Air Force had the Women Air Force Service Pilots, known as WASPs, and that later became the Women Air Forces. The Navy had the WAVs, the Women's Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Services. In 1942, the Coast Guard established their Women's Reserve, known as the SPARS, after the motto Semper Paratus, always ready. And in 1943, the Marine Corps created the Marine Corps' Women Reserve. Women performed admirably in every conceivable job. They suffered casualties and yet were denied full military status. The U.S. decided not to use women in combat because public opinion would not tolerate it. In the picture in the center, it shows President Barack Obama, who in 2009 awarded all of the surviving WASPs the Congressional Gold Medal. Here are some of Nevada's women that served in World War II. When Helen Cannon graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, she began working as a teacher and began saving all of her extra money to pay for flying lessons. She soon realized that flying was her passion, and she took a job at a local airport in South Dakota to get more flying time. During World War II, she enlisted in the Women Air Force Service Pilot, the WASPs. Only around 1,000 women could serve in this capacity, and Cannon was very conscious at the time of the gender discrimination with the women pilots faced. She never complained, though, out of a sense of patriotism and because she treasured her time as a pilot regardless of the circumstances. While serving as a test pilot at Luke Field Air Base in Arizona, Helen met her husband, Bob. They were married in Los Angeles in 1946, moved to Las Vegas. Cannon was a community leader in Las Vegas for over 60 years. She was involved in numerous local service organizations, including the Junior League, the United Fund, and the PTA. She's also very interested in local education, serving as clerk, vice president, and then president of the Clark County School Board and president of the Nevada State School Board Association. While serving on the school board, she oversaw the creation of the free school lunch program, the Southern Nevada Vocational School, and KLVX-TV, the local public access station. Throughout her life, she maintained an interest in her passion for flying, and in 1961, she flew in the women's coast-to-coast air race known as the Powder Puff Derby. During World War II, Margaret Gee took flying lessons with the hope of joining the WASPs as well. With Nevada being the West Coast line of defense, the U.S. prohibited private pilots from flying within 100 miles of the West Coast, so she traveled from California to Minden, Nevada for her flying lessons. Upon completion, WASP recruiters accepted her into the program and ordered her to report for 7 months of training in Sweetwater, Texas. Upon graduation, Gee was assigned to the Las Vegas Army Airfield, where she dealt with male pilots who felt that women, especially one of Chinese ancestry, had no place in the service. Gee instructed male pilots in instrument flying, evaluated pilots renewing their instrument ratings, and co-piloted B-17s during gunnery practice using live ammunition. Gee served in this capacity until the Army Air Corps disbanded the WASP program on December 20th of 1944. For her role as one of the first women in history to fly American military aircraft in defense of America's freedom, Margaret Gee earned her place in the Nevada Aerospace Hall of Fame. Phyllis Bender was born in Reno, Nevada, on March 7th of 1919, a third-generation Nevada whose grandparents emigrated to Lovelock from Denmark and established the Anker Ranch in 1877, a ranch that is still in her family today. As a member of the Pershing County High School class of 1937, she was an accomplished pianist and earned her University of Nevada tuition by playing piano gigs, tutoring, and holding various summer jobs on campus. She received her bachelor's and master's degree in education from UNR. And after graduation, she taught business for the Eureka County School District and Yarrington High School. Phyllis enlisted in the Women's Army Corps in June of 1943 and rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant. In 1944, she was assigned to Chief of Staff General George Marshall's office at the Pentagon. Being fluent in French, Phyllis accompanied General Marshall to the 1944 Roosevelt-Churchill Conference in Quebec, Canada. Louise Alois Smith was born in Lovelock, Nevada. As World War II progressed, she enlisted in the Women's Army Corps in 1943. She achieved the rank of sergeant while serving as a recruiter and rehabilitation counselor in military hospitals until her discharge in 1946. During this time, she learned compassion and the importance of community service. As a WAC, she was awarded the World War II Victory Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the American Campaign Medal. After World War II, many women returned to homemaker duties, but Louise Smith searched for opportunities to apply her knowledge that she had gained in the Army. She decided to put her Army experience to use, and she ran for assemblyman from Pershing County. She was elected to the Nevada Assembly in 1949 and reelected in 1951. As an assemblyman, she served on 8 standing committees, including Veteran Affairs, Legislative Functions, Social Welfare, State Library, and State Publicity. Leadership positions at the time were awarded to women mainly for ceremonial purposes. However, following her reelection in 1951, Louise had the honor of being the first woman elected as Speaker pro tempore of the Assembly by her fellow assemblymen. Most people have heard of Rosie the Riveter, but on a local level, Southern Nevada had its own version of hardworking wartime women known as Magnesium Maggies. The term was coined by a researcher and former war worker, Irene Rothstein. With the manpower shortages of World War II, women took jobs throughout the local economy which had formerly been associated with men. The largest group of women worked at the basic magnesium plant in Henderson, Nevada. Women drove forklifts, were full-fledged machinists, and worked over molten metal, stacking and shipping the magnesium to the factories where the ingots would be turned into tracer bullets and aerial flares and incendiary bombs for the machine guns and bomb bays of Allied aircraft. A woman named Thelma Lindquist was dubbed Chlorine Kate because she operated a cell that made chlorine gas, hydrogen, and caustic soda, which were used in the magnesium manufacturing process and sold as byproducts. Workers who ran these cells had to wear rubber shoes to prevent electrocution from the electrodes that were operating in the tanks of brine, and they had to carry a gas mask at all times. Temperatures reached 130 degrees in that section in the summer, and in the winter it was so cold the women would crawl on top of the cells to get warm, even though it was dangerous and forbidden. So the job was so rough that most people lasted only one day, but Thelma Lindquist stuck it out both through war and peace until her retirement in 1955. The women's safety record was better than the men's, but they tended to get hurt in different ways. They dropped things on their feet, they were hit by an object, or they tripped, the kind of thing that happens to you when you are not used to a factory setting and find yourself in one, said Rothstein. Economic opportunity was an important reason women worked in the war industries, but patriotism was also a strong motivation. Most of the Magnesium Maggies enjoyed their first taste of equal pay for equal work, generally 90 cents an hour for the Henderson production workers. Even those women who went back to their homes after the war cut a path for other women. They did jobs that were men's jobs before. While breakthrough into management remained in the future, the door to industrial employment would never again be so tightly closed as it had been in pre-war days. After a year of bitter congressional and public debate, President Harry Truman signed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948, establishing a permanent place for women, other than the nurses, who were already permanent, in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. The drive to recruit women into the U.S. Armed Forces and the gradual implementation of racial desegregation in the military, however, were at odds with social trends of the early 1950s. When the Korean War began in 1950, the United States found itself involved in a conflict for which it was unprepared. A downsized military establishment rushed to call up, draft, and recruit the needed manpower. And when it came up short, the services asked American women to leave their homes, jobs, and families and serve their country during a time of need, just as they had in previous wars. That the military offered women far more restricted opportunities than it had during World War II. During the 1950s, the opportunities for any but traditional jobs declined significantly. For more than half the women worked in pink-collar positions, such as personnel and administration, and their basic training included stereotypical women's classes, such as makeup and etiquette lessons. A 1951 Army recruiting pamphlet promised, in authorizing job assignments for women, particular care is taken to see that the job does not involve any type of duty that violates the concept of proper employment for sisters and girlfriends. In the military transport field, for example, women do not drive heavy trucks. The policy on pregnancy and seesawing policies on marriage further contributed to women's attrition rates. Discharge for pregnancy was automatic, and mothers of children under the age of 18 were not permitted to volunteer. Lack of equality in the dependent entitlements, such as family housing and medical care, also made the military less attractive to women. For the remainder of the 1950s, the recruitment and retention of women entered a state of near inertia. The all-male draft and absence of official policy and directives encouraging the use of women, the family-unfriendly policies, and societal attitudes toward women's roles contributed to serious doubts on one hand and ambivalence on the other about the value of women's programs to defense forces. Women responded to those failures by staying away. Most of the participation by women during the Korean War was as nurses in MASH units or aboard hospital ships like the USS Benevolence. More than 250,000 women served in America during the Vietnam War. Thousands were stationed in Japan, Guam, Hawaii, the Philippines, or stateside hospitals. Women served off Vietnam's coast on the hospital ships, such as the USS Repose and the USS Sanctuary. But 85% of the women who served in Vietnam were nurses. Catherine Barron of Nevada is a retired Master Sergeant with the U.S. Air Force. She was one of the women who did not serve as a nurse. When she enlisted, she had them put in writing that she would be working on a flight line. She wanted to do more than tend to soldiers' wounds. She held them to that and became the first woman to work on that flight line. Before going to Vietnam, women were given mock setups of battlefield casualties. This was supposed to prepare them for the real war and the real casualties. The women also got field training, which consisted of how to fire an M16 rifle. Ironically, though, the women were never allowed to carry these weapons. While not focused on military women, I did come across one other story that I found to be uniquely Nevada. On the afternoon of August 26 of 1965, with no advance public notice, President Johnson signed Executive Order 11241, eliminating the marriage exception for the draft, but grandfathering in those already married on or before the effective date of the order that afternoon. They gave them until midnight. On the East Coast, they were largely out of luck. Most counties required a cooling off period between getting a marriage license and getting married. But out west, the wedding window was bigger. Not only did the time change work in their favor, but Nevada was already famous for same-day licenses, no blood tests, and no wait weddings. The matrimonial mobilization from Canada began immediately. Most couples came from Los Angeles, and the Las Vegas Justice of the Peace, James Brennan, told the Associated Press at the time, "But I've had a few calls from New Jersey, Kansas City, and Chicago from people asking how long we'll be open." One of the couples he married that night came on a chartered plane from Newark, New Jersey. As midnight nears, those at the back of the line grew visibly anxious, said Brennan, who made $8 per ceremony. He picked up the pace by clipping off a few more lines from his spiel. At 11:40 p.m., he remembered the way lawmakers up in the State House in Carson City were known to extend the legal day when it suited their purposes. So he directed his two assistants to cover the courtroom clock with a typewriter cover. If it was good enough for the state legislature, it was good enough for a two-bit judge in Las Vegas, he said. Not ashamed that at least a few of the marriages, time-stamped August 26, were in fact performed a few minutes into August 27th. During the Cold War, the country relied on selective service system to draft enough young men, but the armed services maintained women volunteers needed to be smarter and more qualified than these men to perform the jobs open to them. Recruiting brochures promised challenging jobs with unlimited opportunities for women, but most of the truly challenging technical jobs were closed to women. And those already trained and experienced in technical skills such as engine repair, equipment maintenance, intelligence, weather and radio operations were retrained for jobs the military considered to be women's work. In the Army, WACs no longer underwent bivouac training or weapons familiarization. Air Force recruits were told how to apply lipstick correctly, and women Marines were told their lipstick and nail polish had to match the scarlet braid on their uniform hats. Their careers were further limited because women were allowed few promotion opportunities and none could serve as generals or admirals. It was not until 1967, after years of debate and pressure from various military advisory groups, that Congress voted to allow women's promotions to higher grades, including general and admiral, and removing the 2% ceiling on women's military strength. Despite advocating the bill, the Armed Services Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives stated, "There cannot be complete equality between men and women in the matter of military careers. The stern demands of combat, sea duty, and other types of assignments directly related to combat are not placed upon women in our society." But women were making small strides. All of the federal service academies were directed to enroll women students by 1976. But it's interesting to note that the two private military colleges, the Citadel and the Virginia Military Institute, did not open their doors to women until 1995 and 1997, respectively. That's 20 years after the federal service academies were opened. So while I graduated from West Point in 1982 with the third class of women, I received my appointment from Michigan. I was curious as to who the first women were to graduate from the Naval, Air Force, and military academies. Unfortunately, due to privacy reasons, I was unable to determine who the women were from the Air Force and Navy, but I had better luck with my alma mater. This is Karen Fish, now Karen Hallett. She was the first woman from Nevada to graduate from West Point in 1988. After completing her service obligation, she left the military, only to return later when she became a chaplain in the Army Reserve. She is known as the chaplain with a dog. Her dog's name is Sergeant Zoe, who is a psychiatric service dog trained to help people dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. In total, Nevada had 18 women graduated from West Point, and there are currently 5 women cadets from Nevada at West Point. While women entered the Service Academy, many more were entering through Reserve Officer Training Corps programs known as ROTC all across the country, and women were seen in more and more units in all military services. I have not been able to determine who the first women were in the state's ROTC programs, but a Women's Army Corps milestone took place in 1967 when Captain Lois A. Henry became the first WAC member assigned to the cadre of any ROTC unit, and that happened at the University of Nevada, Reno. The number of both enlisted and officer women in all services continued to increase, and we begin to see a few small conflicts emerge. This is where we started to see the battlefield change. Women's opportunities were opening up and women were on the ground with men. But the big question was, were women in combat? In 1983, more than 200 Army women participated in the invasion of Grenada, but they were not considered having been in combat. In the 1989 Panama invasion, at the time the largest US military action since Vietnam, women soldiers gained a new visibility. Almost 800 participated, constituting about 4% of the total force. A female captain of a US military police unit, Linda Bray, became a celebrity after leading her unit in capturing a military dog kennel, which was actually a concealed weapons storage location, in a half-hour firefight. The Pentagon first played up her story, which was receiving favorable media coverage. However, when her story threatened to unleash political forces that would exert pressure to lift the combat exclusion law for women, Pentagon officials reportedly leaked disinformation to undermine her account. Captain Bray faced persistent harassment after the episode, and she left the Army in 1991. But her role ignited the debate over the role of women in the military. Mobilization for the Gulf War included an unprecedented proportion of women from the active services, 7%, as well as Reserve and National Guard, 17%. It was the largest female deployment in US history. Over 40,000 US military women served in key combat support positions throughout the Persian Gulf region. Women in Desert Storm did everything the male troops did except engage in ground combat. They could essentially get fired upon. They just weren't, by existing regulations, allowed to shoot back. However, here's a quote from someone who was there on the way it really was. She said, "I was a female paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I want to make you aware of the fact that the females in the 82nd were among the ground troops that pushed into Iraq during the ground war, and we most definitely could shoot back." In 2010, the Army created cultural support teams called CSTs, a secret pilot program to insert women alongside special operations soldiers in Afghanistan. The Army reasoned that women could play a unique role on special ops teams, accompanying their male colleagues on raids, and while those soldiers were searching for insurgents, the women could question mothers, sisters, daughters, and wives living in the compound. The presence of the women on these teams had a calming effect on enemy households, but more importantly, they were able to search adult women for weapons and gather crucial intelligence. They could build relationships in a way that male soldiers in an Islamic country never could. The women who volunteered for the 6.5-month deployment took a 10-week course at Camp Pendleton in California, where they were trained for any possible situation. The pioneers of the CSTs proved for the first time, at least to some special operations soldiers, that women might be physically and mentally tough enough to become one of them. Kat Kalin, who was raised in Elko, Nevada, was a recruiter with the Nevada National Guard when she volunteered for the cultural support team. I hoped to see myself when I went to Fort Bragg for training. I hoped to see women who were competitive and hungry and wanted something bigger than what their home units offered. The integration of women into the special operations missions was not about gender, Kalin said. It's about your capability and if you can do the job correctly. That's how we won over the Rangers. It wasn't about proving a point. Kalin from Elko is pictured in the left in the photo on the lower right in this slide. And there's also a book called Ashley's War by Gail Lemon, which talks about the cultural support teams and the first ones to go into Afghanistan. It's really a very interesting book. Women in all branches continue to serve every day. Currently, over 214,000 women are serving on active duty, with an additional 588,000 serving in the reserves and National Guard. And women have become an integral part of our armed forces. In January of 2016, all Defense Department positions opened to women without exception. For the first time in U.S. military history, as long as they qualify and meet specific standards, the Secretary of Defense said that women will be able to contribute to the mission with no barriers at all in their way. And so we have begun to see a lot of new firsts for women in all of the services. Here we see the Army's first 2 women Rangers, the Marines' first infantry officer, the Air Force's first woman to join the Thunderbirds, and the Navy recently selected Captain Amy Bauernschmidt to command a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. I want to talk about a few of the Nevada National Guard first. The Adjutant General of Nevada is the senior officer of the Nevada National Guard, overseeing command of more than 4,000 Nevada Army and Air National Guard personnel, and responsible for both the federal and state missions of the Nevada National Guard. The Adjutant General is appointed by the Governor of Nevada. From 2005 through 2009, Major General Cynthia Kirkland was the first woman to serve as the Adjutant General for the state of Nevada. Colonel Joanne Ferris became the first woman to command a brigade-level unit in the Nevada Army National Guard in 2015. When she completed her command tour, her replacement was also a woman, Colonel Mary Devine. And on the left is my friend Charlie, on the right is my friend Charlie Smith. During her career, Charlie had several firsts for women, to include commander of the 321st Signal Company for the Nevada Army National Guard. She was also the first woman to serve as the executive officer in UNR's ROTC program. Deanna Burt is the United States Air Force Major General, currently serving as the commander of the Combined Force Space Component Command of the U.S. Space Command. As a Brigadier General, a one-star general, she was the first woman to serve as Vice Commander, United States Air Force Warfare Center at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Jeannie Marie Leavitt is the United States Air Force Major General. She became the U.S. Air Force's first female fighter pilot in 1993 and was the first woman to command an Air Force Combat Fighter Wing, which was the 57th Wing at Nellis Air Force Base from April of 2016 through June of 2018. Lori Robinson, as an Air Force captain in 1986, served as a female instructor at the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. She went on to become the first woman to serve as commander of the Command and Control Operations Division of the Air Force Weapons School, also at Nellis Air Force Base. She pinned on her 4th star when she took command of Pacific Air Forces, known as PACAF, in October of 2014. And on May 13th of 2016, Robinson became the highest ranking woman in the United States military history when she assumed command of the United States Northern Command, known as NORTHCOM, and the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD. In 2017, First Class Brittany Spears and Specialist Cindy Robles reported to Fallon Naval Air Station's 609th Engineer Company as the first 2 combat-trained soldiers assigned to any Nevada Army National Guard unit. Robles, who graduated from Sunrise Mountain High School in Las Vegas, attended the University of Nevada, Reno, where she joined ROTC. And 19-year-old Sears is a 2016 Galena High School graduate from Reno. She didn't want to be a 42 Alpha, an administrative clerk, and sit behind a desk. Going out on patrols and doing demolition was a big selling point for her. Since this is my presentation, I get to include one of my firsts, which is the picture at the bottom center of this slide. I was the first woman to command Hawthorne Army Depot, which is located about 2.5 hours southeast of Reno in Hawthorne, Nevada. The depot was established in 1929, and so it was my honor to serve as the first woman commander of the depot. The photo on the upper left is Second Lieutenant Katerina Schumacher. She is the first woman to successfully complete the required training to operate a tank and to lead her own tank platoon in the Nevada National Guard. On the right is Chief Warrant Officer Cicely Williams. The Nevada Army Guard marked an important diversity milestone recently with the graduation of its first African-American female UH-60 Black Hawk pilot from Rotary Wing Aviation School. Williams grew up in Gardnerville, Nevada, and graduated from Douglas High in 2002. She subsequently attended and graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno, and received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Chief Williams has been in the Nevada Army National Guard since 2010. She graduated from the U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence in July of 2017 to become a full-fledged certified rotary wing pilot. In 1970, women accounted for only 1% of the active duty force. By 1980, that number had jumped to 9%. And in 2017, that figure was at 16%. As more women serve, the more women veterans we have. In fact, women are the fastest growing segment of the veteran population. In 2014, Governor Sandoval established the Women Veterans Advisory Committee to address the needs of women veterans in the state of Nevada. Since the committee's inception, I've been the chair of that committee, and for me, it has been a great opportunity to work with and meet women veterans throughout the state. And it was my pleasure yesterday to read a proclamation from the state's virtual Women's Veterans Conference, where Governor Sisolak proclaimed March of 2021 to be Women's Military History Month for the state of Nevada. And so I thank all of you for celebrating Women's Military History Month with me today. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, Anne. If you'd like to unmute yourself, and we will proceed to have some questions answered. If you would like to ask a question, please put them on the chat and we will be able to ask her. First of all, Anne, would you like to comment on any new recent developments? You made that first presentation in March and it's no longer Women's History Month, but it's still very memorable, of course. And anything else that you'd like to add to the presentation at this time?
Sure. One thing, Linda, that's been in the news lately is a discussion in Congress about whether or not women should register for selective service in the event that there's a draft in the United States. Since all the services became an all-volunteer force in the late 70s, men have been required to register for the selective service when they turn 18. And now that all combat positions have been open to women, there's a discussion on whether or not women should also register for selective service. So it will be interesting to see how that discussion progresses and whether or not the law is changed to include women in selective service.
Right, good, thank you. Someone wants to know what barriers to equity or equality remain for women in the United States military today?
Yeah, there are still a few, particularly in some of those combat units. While all the positions were officially opened in 2016 by the Department of Defense, it was kind of a slow rollout. And they wanted to ensure that there were some women officers and senior non-commissioned officers in those units before putting junior enlisted women into those units, so that there was kind of a support system for women. And so you continue to see more and more women in those combat type of units throughout all of the services. And so it was a very conscious way to make sure support was there. And so because of that, the rollout has been slow, and it was not an immediate opening of all those positions, but I think it is getting better.
What kind of barriers did you have to cross that you can mention or that you can share with us?
I think one of the things that I always felt as a woman in the Army is that every time I went to a new unit, that I had to prove myself, you know, as a woman, that I could do the job. Whereas I didn't always get the impression that men had that same kind of requirement. You know, they kind of walked in and people expected them to be able to do the job that they were in. And so you always kind of felt like you were a little bit behind. But as long as you could go in and show that you were competent, you could quickly gain the acceptance of both your fellow soldiers and your bosses up the chain.
Right, right. And what was your specialty in the Army?
I was in ammunition management, and hence that's why I commanded Hawthorne Army Depot, which is an ammunition depot. And so I did that at various places throughout the United States. And I also worked in personnel for a little bit. And my last job was at Army Material Command Headquarters, where I had the opportunity to work for General Ann Dunwoody, who was the first 4-star general in the Army.
Right. What led you to ammunitions? Did you like blowing up things?
When you're at West Point, you pick your branch, your specialty, based on your class rank when you're in your senior year. And so right before that, they do kind of a straw poll, and it gives you an idea of what you can get. And I thought I wanted to go into military intelligence because that just sounded kind of interesting and neat. And when we done the straw poll, we completed the straw poll, it looked like I could not get into military intelligence. And so I said, I better look around and see what else is out there because I need to see you know, what's going to be my second or third choice if I need to, if I'm not going to be able to get there. And ordnance branch, of which ammunition is a piece of that branch, actually sounded interesting to me when I learned more about it, and actually became my first choice, which I got when I was a senior at West Point.
So you always enjoyed that as
I
much
did.
as anything else, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Going back to earlier in your talk, what was the background to the Sanitary Commission? Why was it called that? Do you know?
I don't really know where that name came from, but it was very much involved in hospital care and medical care, and so maybe that had something to do with why it was called the Sanitary Commission. Obviously, anything in the medical field you want to be clean, and I don't really know if that's the answer to that. But actually, it's a good question.
It's curious, isn't it?
It
And
is.
I know, you know, we always say that it was the precursor to the Red Cross, but I'm just curious as to how that came about. And then that follows my next question. In that early picture, there's a sack of flour there. Is that the sack of flour that we have in our museum, the Gridley sack of flour that raised so much money for the Sanitary Commission?
I certainly believe it is. In the, you know, we call it the Gridley sack of flour at the Historical Society, and I never saw that term in all that I was reading, but talking to the other people in the Historical Society, they all believe that that's the same sack of flour that is in the Historical Society today.
Right, and there were lots of probably imitations raising money in the same way.
I suspect so, because why move it if you could just get another one and say, this is it, and yeah.
Yes, that could be it too. Well, back to that wedding too, that interesting wedding situation in Las Vegas with the judge. Did you know how many weddings that were actually went ahead in that time?
No, I didn't see a final count. That's a good question, but they were all surprised by the executive order that occurred that day, and so he just did as many as he possibly could. He stretched out the time. He shortened his speech to get them married. But it'd be interesting to know exactly how many couples he married that day. Yeah.
A good research, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We have from Mona to all the panelists, the Nevada Women's History Project would love to speak with you about writing biographies about these military women. Huh? So we'll have to send you that email.
Okay. Yeah, if you can connect me, Linda, I'd be happy to take a look at that.
Yeah, so I'll just write that down on so that
the chat should be saved, Linda. Somebody can get that whole thing to you.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay,
Zoom saves it.
All right, very good. Yes, because I didn't want it to disappear when we all did disappear at the end of the session, like it cuts out. Yes, because those biographies, that was and all those women, Mrs. G and Cannon, and they all lived a very long life. Is that
Yeah.
common for the women in the military at that time?
Well, maybe because they were Nevada women, and it's, very much an outdoorsy kind of place. Maybe they just were in good shape and it contributed to their longevity. But I noted that as well, that they actually, most of them had quite long lives.
They did, and they were very active and maybe
Mhm.
very physical too. So always very involved. So it's probably a good recommendation for all of
Yep.
us to take
Yeah.
note of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, I don't think that I have any more questions here. Do you have any concluding remarks that you wish to make?
No, I
No.
just, want to say to everyone, just remember that we have both men and women who are our veterans today within the state of Nevada. A lot of times, you think of the men, but you don't often think of the women. And as I said during the presentation, that one of the fastest growing segments of our veteran population are women. And so there are more and more that you'll see at events around the state. So make sure you reach out to them, say hello, thank them for their service. And
Okay.
I enjoyed being here today, Linda.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you to the library for holding this in association with Artown. And this is our last one with the library this week, but we do have a Nevada Historical Society presentation on Friday at 10:30 with Sam Macaluso, Nevada's firsts and lasts, notorious. So that should be a very interesting presentation, and Sam can always be sure to bring us something very entertaining. So thank you, everybody, and we'd like to turn it back over to the library.
Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank you, Linda Burke, Carol Coleman, and retired Colonel Ann Davis with the Nevada Historical Society.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.
See you next time.